Good evening and welcome. Thank you so much for coming out for tonight's program. I'm Brent Griffiths. I'm a member of the University of Iowa Lecture Committee, and on behalf of the committee, we'd like to welcome you to tonight's lecture. I want to take a moment to thank all those who helped make tonight's event possible. I want to thank the UI Food for Thought Committee for co-sponsoring this lecture with us. In particular, the committee includes Chuck Swanson, Erica Christensen, and Linda Snetzler, who are major forces behind the wonderful idea of a food theme-mester and help make this event possible. I would also like to thank the Public Policy Center for their generous support. On that note, the center will be holding an all-day symposium tomorrow entitled Feeding the World, Challenges for Water Quality and Quantity. Be at the Old Brick Building on Market Street. Registration will start at 8:15 a.m. with the program to begin at 9. You can register at the door. Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. I want to remind everyone to turn off their cell phones and pagers. In addition, immediately following Mr. Bittman's address, he will entertain questions from you, the audience. At that time, we ask you to move to the back of the auditorium and form a line, where you will in turn be directed to the mic, which will be located in the center aisle. There will be people there to assist you. Following this, Mr. Bittman will sign books which are available for purchase in the lobby. On behalf of the committee, I'd also like to thank everyone for their overwhelming and generous support for our call for letters to J.K. Rowling. We look forward to getting those to her shortly. Also, I want to make sure that you are aware of our final lecture for our spring lineup. Damon John, CEO of FUBU, and panelists on ABC's Shark Tank will be speaking and participating in the UI Business Pitch Competition on April 23rd at 7 p.m. in the IMU Main Lounge. Please note that while this event is free, you must, and I emphasize you must, get a ticket ahead of time. Tickets will be available starting Thursday, April 16th at 5 p.m. and can be picked up at the Iowa Memorial Union Hub box office. Tickets are only available in person, and there's a limit of 2 per person. This evening, we are truly thrilled to host Mr. Bittman here in Iowa City. And here to introduce him is local chef Kurt Michael Fries. Well, appreciate your applause, but I want to say a little bit about Kurt. Kurt is the chef and owner of Iowa City's beloved restaurant, Devotee. Devotee has been a community leader in sustainable cuisine, supporting local farmers and food artisans for over 18 years. Kurt has also acted as Director of Healthy Food and Advocacy for New Bow City Market in Cedar Rapids and recruited all of the anchor merchants that make up that vibrant community. In 2006, Fries founded and still publishes Edible Iowa River Valley Magazine, a member of the James Beard Award-winning Edible Communities family of publications. Fries is a member of the board of directors of the Iowa Restaurant Association, has served on the boards of Slow Food USA, the Iowa Food Systems Council, and New Bow City Market. At Shelter House Iowa City, he streamlined systems and the curriculum for a 12-week culinary basic training course for Shelter House clients. He's also written 2 books, A Cook's Journey, Slow Food in the Heartland, and Chasing Chili's, Hotspots Along the Pepper Trail. So ladies and gentlemen, now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Chef Kurt Michael Fries.
Thank you. I didn't realize I'd been that busy. A quick thank you on my own part, too, especially to the folks at the Pullman that fed a group of us tonight. Doug and Ben and Nate and the gang over there did a great job, very good food. If y'all haven't been down to Pullman yet, don't miss it. And don't miss the fried chicken with the hot sauce. It's out of this world. I also want to say thanks to the university and the Food for Thought semester for bringing us our keynote speaker tonight and for allowing me the honor of introducing him. If my 36 years of food service in the food service industry have taught me anything, besides take good care of your knees, it is that America does not have a food problem. America has a cooking problem. Over the last several decades, Americans have been tricked, flim-flammed, bamboozled, hoodwinked into thinking by giant food conglomerates and media conglomerates into thinking that cooking is a chore, to be avoided if at all possible, and then to be suffered as grudging drudgery. Some of you may have heard me say this before, but I will say it again. Cooking is not a chore. It is not difficult. It is not rocket surgery. It doesn't have to take a lot of time, as our esteemed guest's most recent book demonstrates. What cooking is, though, is what separates us from the rest of the living world. We humans are the only creatures who cook their food. It is also the most tangible way that we show our love to our family and our friends. It is well past time for us to revitalize the kitchen and the table as centers of our everyday lives. Because of my work with Edible and my time on the board of Slow Food USA, I am well aware of the thousands upon thousands of people who are toiling every day to improve America's broken food system. Few, however, have enjoyed the reach and impact of our guest here tonight, who has shown millions the benefit of cooking for yourself. Mark Bittman is an award-winning journalist and cookbook author who has written for the New York Times for 30 years. He was the minimalist in the dining section from 1997 to 2010. He is currently a columnist for the Times op-ed pages, the first to editorialize about food in a major newspaper. I wish more would follow that example, as well as in the Sunday Magazine and the Wednesday Food section. His books include the now standard How to Cook Everything. If you don't own it, you need to, as well as the groundbreaking Food Matters and Vegan Before 6, hashtag VB6. It debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. His most recently published book, which I alluded to earlier, is How to Cook Everything Fast. It is also a Times bestseller. Throughout his career, he has made hundreds of television appearances, including Showtime's Emmy-winning documentary on climate change, Years of Living Dangerously. His numerous professional honors include the James Beard Leadership Award and Books for a Better Life Lifetime Achievement Award. Wow. Okay, everyone, please join me for a warm welcome for Mr. Mark Bittman.
Thank you. Hi. It's great to be here, seriously. Had a lovely day. And we'll try to keep that going. This is actually a kind of a sermon, a discussion of moral issues anyway. It's secular, but it is about morality. Based on current feeling and maybe even your own behavior, you might think that the answer to the question, what is it we want, is almost everything. But consumerism isn't inevitable. Want isn't biological or predetermined or universal, but cultural. We're not born craving Skittles or donuts. So the more important question, the real question, is what do we need? And the answers to that question are decidedly not cultural, and they haven't changed ever. We need air, water, food, shelter. If we have those, we can live decent, peaceful, and even fulfilling lives. I can be pretty sure that you join me then in seeing it as paradoxical that in the midst of the greatest wealth imaginable, a time of relative peace, we can't guarantee clean air, potable water, healthy food, and adequate shelter. We failed to guarantee those to the world's citizens. We even failed to guarantee them to our own. These are both global and local issues. Our water supply is certainly not that of Texas or Uzbekistan or even that of Des Moines, which has problems of its own, as we know. Even air is local. Being downwind from a coal plant or a gas well exposes us to higher concentrations of toxic substances than those who are upwind. Then there's what you expect me to talk about, and which is what I mostly will, which is that those who succumb to the rapacious marketing of the modern food industry may indeed become sick. But it's important to remember that food and energy and water and land and housing all have many of the same problems. Some of us tackle those problems individually. If you have enough money, you can move to a cleaner place, you can buy pure water or filter it yourself, you can buy organic vegetables. But the majority of people can't do that, and it's important to remember that too. But even those of us who can afford to are going to be affected by climate change, ocean acidification, the poisoning of our land, water, and air, and the hobbling of our economy by ever-escalating healthcare costs brought about by a diet that is actually the worst ever created. You may eat as well as you want to, as well as anyone ever did, but you're still going to pay for the healthcare of those who fall prey to big food's marketing tactics, which cause disease almost as surely as smoking causes lung cancer. We can make a difference. We can make a difference personally, and by making a difference personally, we can do so locally, and by doing so locally, we can do so globally, but these effects are limited. You can minimize your carbon footprint, you can eat less fish, you can encourage regional food systems, but you can't fix the food system yourself. But you know, that's why society was invented, to get things done that we can't do ourselves, to hire teachers and to build roads and to improve public health. And if we want dramatic improvement in environment and healthcare, employment, poverty, climate change, really, if we want to improve our likelihood of survival, those who value the well-being of the planet and the mental, spiritual, and physical health of human beings and other inhabitants must work together, act like a society, and gain more power. This is easier said than done, but this is the job of the food movement, because food is all about the big questions. In fact, the only aspect of food that you can discuss without bringing in everything else is how much fun it is to eat, and even that's becoming tainted. It's hard to talk about your garden or your supermarket or the food on your table without talking about the failure or penalization of government, the dominance of corporations, the breakdown of food security, and so on. Even the seemingly simple questions have become complicated. What's natural? What's healthy? What's food? What should people eat? I know it's unpopular to dictate what people consume, but on the other side of the coin, there's this fact. People want to know what to eat. They ask me, and I know that they ask many of you too. People feel like there's nothing left to eat. It's all too scary. They're afraid of gluten, and they don't know what it is. They're afraid of GMOs, and not 1 in 10 person could give you a definition. These fears are debatable, and sometimes they're even stupid. But in a way, they point to what people really want, which is food that isn't going to hurt them. Real food won't. We know this. People believe that everything gives you cancer or heart disease or makes you fat, or even worse, doesn't fill you up. They feel that nothing is safe, nothing is pure, nothing is natural. They believe that even organic is tainted. There's a lot of skepticism out there. But the message should actually be that food is good, as long as it's actual food. Much of this probably sounds familiar to you personally also. You show up at work or school, or you get up in your own house, or it's lunchtime, and you want to eat. You only have a few requirements. That's to taste good. You want to avoid empty calories. You don't want to gain weight. You want to be healthy, whatever the hell that means. You can't quite figure it out, and neither, it seems, can anybody else. Maybe you're toying with a semi-vegan diet, or you're a paleo fan, or you've settled on a Mediterranean diet, but you're not quite sure, you don't know what makes sense. Maybe you're avoiding gluten, again, even if you don't know what it is, or even if you're not actually gluten intolerant. Or maybe you're off dairy. And it would be nice if what you ate was organic. I mean, who wants to eat pesticides? Local also would be super. Local is better, if local is a word that means grown by real people who live nearby and tend the soil and use minimum amounts of chemicals, whether organic or inorganic. I'm not sure that's what local means, but if it means that, I'm all for it. The point is that I think mainly we want to be told how to eat right. We want that information from a trustworthy source. But no one trusts the government, no one trusts corporations, no one trusts journalists. And no wonder, every piece of research seems to contradict the piece of research that came before. Scientists and other researchers are under enormous pressure to publish their findings, even when their findings are preliminary. And guess what? Their findings are almost always preliminary. Real science doesn't happen as much as it used to. What happens is a bit of research, often with a predetermined outcome that gets published and then vanishes within weeks or months. Sometimes it seems like you might as well claim to invent fusion power. But when it comes to eating, we don't need that much more research. Everyone already knows what to do. Eat less in general, eat less fake food, eat more real food, and don't worry so much. This isn't easy, of course, because we live in a food carnival. We eat too much of the wrong things, and we know that, so we worry constantly. But there'd be no need to worry about diet if only we ate real food, and nothing but real food. There are qualifications, and we have to define real. I will get to that. But all of this is made further problematic by our insistence that there's some magic bullet, some diet, the gluten-free diet being the latest, that will fix you. But for most of us, it's not that complicated. In fact, if you quoted Michael Pollan's most famous 7 words, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, you'd be saying almost all there is to say, except for the food issues that don't involve eating, because few people would deny that climate change, energy policy, and agriculture are at least in part food issues and should be addressed in a comprehensive or intelligent way. We're not doing that. No matter how much sense it might make to rationalize energy use, rein in climate change, improve the way we produce our food, none of this is going to happen on a large scale until we have governments that address these issues. A democratic food system can only happen in a democracy. But our right to that system is blocked by solidly entrenched corporations controlling a nearly entirely beholden bureaucracy. And the current food system is like a foreign invader. It's robbed us of our natural resources, polluted our water and land, left some people hungry while sickening others with what might be called poisonous calories, contributed mightily to climate change, and more. That's the system that fights regulation in order to defend its profits. To fix this, to create a food system that's green, fair, affordable, and nutritious, we need 4 things. 1 is a working definition of food. We don't even have that. 2 is transparency in food production. 3 is an ability to regulate and educate. There's a 4th, and I'll get to that. All of these 3 can really only come about from a shift in power. And it's probably a 20-year process, or worse, and it could end in tragedy. Because we will get to a diet that's what we now call sustainable, but whether we get there gracefully or as the result of some dystopic collapse remains to be seen. But food is great because there are more opportunities in food to move things forward than in most other big issues because of this 4th element. And this 4th element is a personal food policy. And as I said, as individuals, we can have a huge impact on the food system by changing our own diets without help from anyone. And of course, we can implement small changes in production and local scale to the extent that entrepreneurs are willing to take on the risk and re-support them. But on the big scale, the big picture, the other 3 factors, defining food, transparency in production, and regulation and education, we need help. We didn't invent industrial agriculture. It appeared efficient until it became clear that it was anything but, and our job is to change it. But we can't uninvent it, at least without help. Again, government's role is to help us get things done. How can we get the government to help us change the food system? It's a tough question. But it's of supreme interest to those of us who think of ourselves as part of the food movement, or any other movement for that matter. But let's take these 4 things in order. Number 1, what's food? Food, says my dictionary, is any nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink, or that plants absorb in order to maintain life and growth. That's pretty good. It helps if you know what nutritious means. It's sort of an embedded word in that definition. So if you look up nutrition, it says it's something that helps maintain good condition or promote health. This helps us define non-foods, because if food is something that promotes health, then things that don't promote health are not food. So we put in our mouths, chew, or just swallow many things that are not actually food. The non-food that we consume most of course, is soda. I use the word soda to mean sugar-sweetened beverages of all kinds. So Gatorade, vitamin water, Snapple, soda. Soda remains the biggest source of calories in our diet. 7% of our calories come from soda. Now, the soda companies will tell you that only 7% of our calories come from soda, but that's like saying that only 7% of deaths in the United States come from Alzheimer's, which actually is true. In fact, soda is directly, not solely, but directly responsible for a pandemic not only of obesity, which affects roughly half of us, but of metabolic syndrome, which can and does affect significant numbers of non-obese as well as obese people, and which leads to diabetes, cardiovascular illnesses, cancer, and more. Soda, of course, is only part of the problem, and if you look at the numbers, you quickly see that the more American a country's diet is, the more likely its population is to be suffering chronic health problems. The best example of that is Mexico, whose diet, especially since the signing of the NAFTA treaty 20 years ago, is now essentially an American diet, is now the most obese country in the world, consumes the most soda per capita of any country in the world. Fixing the causes of this metabolic syndrome means leaving the American diet behind, restricting the consumption of non-food like soda, junk food, and other UFOs, unidentifiable food-like objects. Means limiting the marketing of junk food to children and cutting back on the near ubiquity of inexpensive bad food. Figuring out how to do this is really quite simple, but executing it is hard, because Pepsi has no desire to sell less Pepsi, McDonald's has no desire to sell fewer burgers, and no government has yet had the stomach to stop the agricultural practices that make this stuff possible. Chief among those, of course, is monocrop agriculture of the kind for which, I'm sorry to say, Iowa is famous, which degrades land, increases global warming, uses disproportionate amounts of water and energy and fertilizer, and provides not food as much as the means to make junk and industrially produced animals. The bottom line here is that there's a lot going on, so we have to be careful where we put our energies. I'd argue that neither GMOs nor organic are as important as we've made them out to be. But the odd thing is that we spend so much time talking about GMOs, and I can almost guarantee that if I weren't addressing it here, one of the first questions from the audience would be, what do you think about GMOs? So I'm forced to say this, even though it's a waste of time. But I have a different perspective, so maybe it's not quite a waste of time. Because the odd thing is that GMOs barely matter. GMOs are a crutch, and everything positive that's been said about them to date is pretty much a lie. They haven't significantly increased yield. They haven't significantly reduced the amount of chemicals sprayed on crops. They certainly haven't produced crops that are drought tolerant or anything else. They've made it possible to charge 100 times as much for seeds and to use only branded chemicals on the crops they produce. They do make life a little easier for big farmers, and I'll give them that, but they've caused problems too. Having said all of that, GMOs are not scary. They haven't been found to be dangerous, and although the food that we produce with the GMOs is dangerous, but that's only because it's mostly junk food. Take away GMOs, you still have junk food, you still have industrial agriculture. And it's that junk food and that industrial agriculture that's the issue. Arguing that GMOs is the problem is like arguing that eliminating conveyor belts in food processing plants will help us address the obesity crisis. GMOs are tools. If you took them away, you'd have industrial agriculture with a few fewer tools. You would not have non-industrial agriculture. The amount of hyper-processed food would not decline one iota, and our diets wouldn't change. That's why many things are far more important than GMOs, and we need to put energy into these. We need, for example, a ban on the prophylactic use of antibiotics in animal production. The fact that McDonald's, of all companies, is now taking a lead on this is simply ridiculous. It just shows how pathetically slow the rest of us have been in making this change. We need an all-out effort to rein in obesity, not just a little PR, but things like an absolute ban on the marketing of junk food that might be seen by kids under, say, 16. This might mean no TV advertising of junk at all. It might mean no advertising on websites likely to have kids visit, no sponsorship by junk food companies in schools, and so on. Let's put warning labels on soda, and then let's extend those labels to anything that gets, say, more than 50% of its calories from sugar. We need government, not industry-sponsored research on the best way to curb obesity and reduce the risk of diabetes. You know that something like half of our billions, that's wrong, sorry. You know that something like $500 billion in healthcare costs are attributable to chronic diseases like diabetes. People are dying. I think we get that. One of the reasons I think we worry too much about the GMO thing is that people are dying from the overconsumption of junk. People are dying from the overuse of antibiotics and the resulting superbugs. And no one's yet died as a result of using GMOs. I think GMOs stink, at least they have so far, but you know what? I think underpaying workers stinks more. I think breeding superbugs stinks more. I think a system that subsidizes food that causes diabetes stinks more. I think that rampant use of untested pesticides is far more dangerous. What I'm saying is, let's save our energy for things that are really scary. But the fear of GMOs has one benefit, because it might show people that they actually have some power. Because it may well be that food with GMOs is labeled. And once GMO food is labeled, people will be encouraged to push for more. Which brings us to transparency. The more we know about what's in our food, the more we know how it's produced, the more careful and the angrier we're going to be. But we have to fight not only to label what's in foods, we have to know how they're produced. That's why we have to fight against the so-called ag-gag laws, which would prosecute anyone who exposes egregious practice in animal factories by videotaping or photographing or maybe even writing or speaking about them. Surveys show that we want to know whether our food contains genetically modified organisms or is grown with genetically modified organisms, that we want to know how animals are treated, we want to know what contaminants are in our food. And when that food is so labeled, as in this food contains GMOs, despite the money and the marketing, people stop buying it. So suppose food were labeled, this was produced in a facility where animals are treated like widgets, or this food was produced using the following pesticides or antibiotics. People will stop buying those, and the practices will change further. Imagine a sign at McDonald's. We proudly pay our workers a minimum wage and make sure they work few enough hours so we're not obligated to provide them with health care. You might think twice about ordering that cheeseburger. That's unlikely to happen, but how about this? If beef were labeled raised with antibiotics that breed superbugs, or likely to contain antibiotic-resistant E. coli, well, that's not impossible. Yet this is true of much of the industrially raised and processed beef sold throughout the world. 80% of all antibiotics are given to animals to help them grow faster and keep them from getting sick. And that's necessary because the conditions that they're raised in are so terrible. That's another reason for producers to be against transparency. But if you bought less chicken because you were afraid of antibiotic resistance, and if you bought less chicken because you didn't want to eat arsenic, and if you bought less chicken because you didn't like the thought of chickens collapsing under their own weight because their underdeveloped legs couldn't support their enormous breasts, well, guess what? You just bought less chicken. They're going to have to sell you something else, and whether that something else is better chicken or broccoli, we're all better off. This brings us to number 3. For transparency to change our buying and eating habits, we need education and regulation. Government's legitimate role in helping people is routinely overlooked, but beyond Social Security and Medicare, You might think about smoking regulations, child labor laws, paying teachers, even building sewers and roads. I like to think of food safety, and I'm not here only talking about food poisoning from salmonella, but food poisoning from UFOs. I like to think of food safety as similar to seatbelts. Here's the little story of seatbelts. Seatbelt laws were enacted almost by accident in Australia. And what happened? Lo and behold, those seatbelts began to save lives. So activists in the States began to encourage automakers to put seatbelts in cars. Needless to say, the automakers resisted. They were too expensive. Eventually, the federal government required seatbelts. And guess what happened? Not much. They didn't save many lives at all. Why was that? Because people weren't being forced to use them. So it's sort of the equivalent of what we do now, which is telling people to eat better. It's like me yelling, "Don't snack." When you yell at people in a movie theater, "Don't snack," it doesn't do anything. Then a couple of states got the idea of passing mandatory seatbelt laws. And lo and behold again, people used them. So now all 50 states require seatbelt usage. And literally tens of thousands of lives have been saved as a result, because the state, the so-called nanny state, helped people do the right thing. You can call this paternalism, you can call this nanny statism, you can call this whatever you want, but this is a legitimate and desirable role of government. And that's what's needed now: federal and local help in getting people to eat better. Government is here, or should be, to help us fix problems. Among those problems is, let's say, mortality. Mortality is a human problem, of course, but it's a social problem too. We are all going to die. But from what? And when? Those remain legitimate questions. This stuff changes. In the past few years, the human condition has seen an amazing transformation because for the first time in history, chronic diseases, so-called lifestyle diseases, diseases that come from eating badly to some extent, kill more people than contagious diseases, infectious diseases. You're more likely to die from a heart attack than smallpox, and that is now true globally. This is the triumph of 19th and 20th century public health programs over the public health programs that have yet to be established. We need government to help us establish the new public health programs, the ones that will rescue us from 60 years of abuse by a food industry run amok, 60 years of marketing us literally to death with soda and other UFOs. If people want to eat badly, that's their prerogative, of course, just as it's their prerogative to smoke cigarettes. But it's the so-called nanny state's prerogative to protect the rest of us from their behavior. We're all paying for the harmful effects of Coke and Snapple and Gatorade, just as surely as we all pay for interstate highways and the ravages of smoking. And to loosely paraphrase Oliver Wendell Holmes, your right to harm yourself stops when I have to pay for it. Remember the definition of food. Sugar-sweetened beverages don't meet that definition any more than do beer or tobacco, or for that matter, heroin. But right now, a tall 5-year-old with $1 can approach a machine and buy a fizzy beverage equivalent to a cup of coffee with 9 teaspoons of sugar in it. Just as surely as tobacco is a nicotine delivery system, so does a sugar delivery system. And projections say that by 2020, just 5 years from now, diseases caused by soda and things like it will kill more people than lung cancer. Before too long, added sugar will be considered the tobacco of the 21st century. And perhaps you may believe that limiting our right to purchase soda is a slippery slope. It's one that will lead to defining which foods are nutritious and which aren't. It's one that will eventually decide which foods government funds should be used to subsidize and which they shouldn't. And that's a good thing. This is a slippery slope towards better public health policy. If you want to know why voluntary eat better campaigns or why yelling "don't snack" can't possibly work, follow the money. In the last couple of decades, $1 trillion has been spent, which is still a lot of money actually, has been spent on getting us to make the wrong choices in food. $1 billion a year is spent marketing soda in the United States, and almost nothing is spent encouraging the consumption of fruits and vegetables by comparison. The result is, it's all stuff you know. You've noticed I don't do a lot of statistics. I'll do a couple, but 1 in 4 meals contains an unprocessed vegetable. It actually would be 1 in 5 meals, except the lettuce on the hamburger is counted as an unprocessed vegetable. This is not, it's funny, but it's actually true. Maybe 10% of our calories come from unprocessed fruits and vegetables. People ask why I'm picking on soda and, to some extent, industrially produced meat. Shouldn't we be worried about fat and salt or fiber and calcium, gluten? Some of these things matter and some don't, but the answer is really to concentrate on eating real food. Because as soon as you say eat more fiber or antioxidants build immunity, things become more complicated than they need to be. And big food can take any hyper-processed junk, load it up with fiber, contend that it's low salt, put in some antioxidants, and tell you it's healthy. Non-food is stripped of all the things that make food good and of all the bad things people talk about. Only sugar and trans fats appear to be really harmful. Salt is probably an issue only if you have high blood pressure, and most fats turn out to be good for you. But the loss of phytochemicals and fiber, the essentials of whole foods, are the things that are stripped out in hyper-processing and the things that we miss. And more often than not, they're replaced by sugar. I'll talk about meat for a second. Even when it's industrially produced, meat does provide a slew of nutrients. Small amounts of it are one way to eat well, and animals are an integral part of the sane agricultural landscape. But as things stand, most animal production damages not only animals, but our souls and the earth. Industrially produced livestock is probably the second highest contributor to greenhouse gases, and global meat consumption is projected to double, although there isn't the land for that. We already use 70% of the arable land on Earth to support our processing of upwards of 60 billion animals a year. If you strung all of those together, chickens, cows, and pigs, I didn't include lambs because there's not that many of them, they would stretch the equivalent of here to the moon and back 30 times. Here's the bottom line. We define what food is, we make production methods transparent, and we encourage people to eat real food, and we discourage them from eating non-food. You can't expect corporations to fix this, to see the light, because their job is to maximize profits now. So how do we get them to behave? We have to force them. We have to guilt trip them or boycott them or start shareholder rebellions or divestment programs. The real pressure is going to come from us, and our pressure is going to lead to food safety laws and public health regulations. Remember the seatbelt story. Things don't just happen. We have to work on forcing government to acknowledge that food is nourishment and that it sustains us rather than making us ill. I'm going to take 30 seconds to look at what's left in my notes and decide what to do. If you don't mind, talk amongst yourselves. It's good. This is really funny. It's like break. Okay, I'm back. Are you back? I might do that again. I'm trying, there's a bit of a deadline here. Do we need a refresher? Are we okay? It's not a black or white, all or nothing situation. That's what I'm saying. It's not top down, it's not bottom up, it's both. So I'm going to switch gears for most of the rest of the time I have left, because defining food and its relationship to ourselves, to our lives, is something we can all do for ourselves. And I think the political part is obviously, I think it's important. I've just talked about it for half an hour. The personal side is no less so. I'll go through my own little unimpressive but maybe interesting story quickly. In 2005, I was 40 pounds overweight. I had high cholesterol, high blood sugar, sleep apnea, and knees bad enough for surgery. Sometimes these things are genetic. The current thinking about lifestyle diseases and things that lead to them is 50% of the issues are genetic and 50% are lifestyle. And that's a good enough approximation for anybody. But I suspected that my symptoms were diet-related. I knew much less 10 years ago about these things than I do now, but I recognized this and I was unwilling to get involved with the drugs and the surgeries that my conventional doctor recommended. So I read a bit and I wrote a bit and I learned a bit, and a couple of years later, I procrastinated a bit, and a couple of years later, I went to see a wise older doctor who I've now known for 37 years. And after a very brief consult, because he knows me well, he said, "You should become a vegan." And I said, "You got to be kidding." And he said, "You're a smart guy. Figure something out." So I didn't become a vegan. But I did figure something out. I became a part-time vegan, and that's what my book, Vegan Before 6, is about, and you can read about it anywhere you want. I mean, you could buy the book, of course, which would be delightful, but you can read newspaper and magazine and web stories about it and not buy the book. It's okay. We can talk about it during Q&A if you like. But I want to talk about veganism, because it's another, buzzword now. A number of people actually become vegans, but bear in mind that fries and Coke are both vegan. Just like organic junk food is still junk food, there's vegan junk food. Barring catastrophe, at no time in the near future are enough of us going to become vegan to make much of a difference in terms of anything. But if we look at this spectrum, so here's a spectrum. This is, remember Morgan Spurlock, Super Size Me. This is the Morgan Spurlock diet. All junk all the time. This is your crazy Aunt Pat, who eats raw celery and carrots and nothing else. I actually know a guy who basically lives on it. So your crazy Uncle Pat really lives on celery and carrots. He's really skinny. I mean, if you want to get skinny, eat celery and carrots. Don't eat anything else. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. So if we look at this spectrum, all that really matters for most of us is that we move away from old Morgan Spurlock and towards Uncle Pat. We don't need to get there. It doesn't matter. We don't want to be vegans. We want to be eating more plants. And this was part of, I don't want to say revelation, but this was part of what I realized 10 years ago when I went from writing exclusively about cooking to writing about cooking and all of this other stuff. I can sum up everything that matters about diet and a personal food policy in 30 seconds. I won't, because I'm enjoying talking too much, but I could do this in 30 seconds, but I'm going to take a minute or maybe two to do this. 2 rules. There's only 2 rules. We defined food, right? Food is nutritious. Food promotes health. So we know what food is. So you go to the typical supermarket, and there might be, I don't know what the number is. I mean, I always say 80,000. I should look it up. But there's some number of tens of thousands of items in a typical supermarket. Doesn't matter what the number is. Many. Of those items, some percentage do not qualify as food. If you look up the dictionary definition of poison, which is something that causes ill health, some of these things are closer to poison than they are to food. So if we say, we can each make our own decision about this. I could make a rule, but there's no reason you should listen to me. If we each say, of these 80,000 items in the supermarket, I think 20,000 of them, or 40,000 of them, or more likely 60,000 of them, are really not food. They're not things I want to be eating on a regular basis. So let's take those non-food items, those UFOs, whatever you want to call them, let's take those items and we'll just put them to the side. I'll go visit that land every now and then. I'll have a Pop-Tart or a can of Coke or whatever it is, but that's not part of my diet anymore. I'm taking that stuff that's not really food and I'm getting rid of it. That's rule number one, eat real food. What's rule number two? Eat more plants. So the rule here, simply stated, is I'm going to eat more plants this week than I ate last week. I'm going to eat more plants this month than I ate last month. I'm going to eat more plants this year than I ate last year. And it's like, what is it? Lather, rinse, repeat. Just, I'm going to keep doing that. Those are the two rules. Eat real food, eat more plants. You don't have to say anything else. You don't have to worry about anything else. So I want to note that there are a couple things that I did not say. I didn't say don't eat any meat or dairy. I didn't say don't eat any hyper-processed junk. I didn't even say don't drink any soda. I didn't say eat organic. I didn't say eat local, although both of those things can be desirable. I certainly didn't say shop at Whole Foods. Because someone's going to say to me, someone's going to ask me, how are poor people supposed to shop at Whole Foods? But I didn't say that you should shop at Whole Foods. Or we'll get to that, because someone will ask me this question. I said, in short, change the proportions of the things in your diet so that you favor plants over all else, and don't eat so much junk. That's the most important thing we can do to change our personal food policies. And even if we had rice and beans instead of chicken, had oatmeal instead of bacon and eggs, had a salad instead of a cheeseburger, one of those things each, once a week, those three changes once a week, that's 10% of your diet. So if you did things like that once a day, you'd change your diet by 35%. That's a big deal. And back to my story, I don't think I actually said that I did all that stuff and it worked. But it did. I lost 35 pounds. My cholesterol went back to where it's supposed to be. My blood sugar went back to where it's supposed to be. My knees don't bother me except for when I carry a 30-pound backpack, which is how much weight I lost. And that was just basically from eating more plants and eating less junk. This kind of behavior, the message I'm trying to get across, I want you to, I would love it if you each went and bought 10 copies of VB6, but this doesn't have to be formal. You don't need a formula. It can be, and some of us need a formal structure. I did. But others, I can say, eat more plants, it makes so much sense, and you'll say, yeah, I should be doing that, and you might. But for all of us, the idea is to keep moving in the right direction down that spectrum without caring that we're actually not going to get to the other end of the spectrum. It doesn't matter. It's not black and white, as I said before. Just as you might not exercise every day, you might not fully engage your personal food policy every day. But you're moving in the right direction, and that's empowering, and that's what's important. I want to talk for just a couple more minutes about the things that I think are achievable in the near future, and then we'll get to questions from you. What can we actually get done? Because I gave a smaller talk this afternoon. There was a lot of Q&A, and a lot of it focused on how can we fix this, how can we fix that? And they're very easy questions. I mean, ask me anything. I usually can say, oh yeah, you do this, you do that. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's going to happen eventually. It's not going to happen probably in my lifetime. So what's achievable? Because I think it's really important to have some victories. And I do think that McDonald's announcing that it's going to not buy chicken with antibiotics anymore is a small victory, an interesting victory. And I think these things are important. So what's achievable? Everybody who's in my position, that is everybody who talks about this, has their own pet issue, their own issue that they think is like the number one, this is the thing we have to fix. This is the thing we have to fix, and I think this is achievable. We have to make it harder to market junk to kids. We really do. Because if we can save kids when they're 2 or when they're 4, if we can teach them to eat well, then they're going to eat well when they're 20, 40, 60, and they're going to live to be 80 or 100. If we can't, then they're going to be in the same position that most of us in this room are in, which is struggling in some way with our diets, having to exercise discipline to unlearn the stuff that we learned as kids and as teenagers and to relearn it now as adults. And we all know, we've all done something in our lives that was hard to change, and we all know how hard it is to change our diet and how easy it is to become recidivists, to backslide. So that's number one. We have to do that. It's a national issue, but we can work on it locally too. We can get our school system to take junk food out of vending machines. We can ban vending machines in school or use vending machines to dispense real food. I think we have to make it illegal not only to market soda to kids or make it more difficult, but even to sell soda to kids. And I recognize that this would make drinking soda an act of rebellion, and we were all kids once, and we know that acts of rebellion are very popular, but the reality is that people smoke fewer cigarettes now than they used to because it's illegal for kids to buy them. That was a really important step. And the idea of like taking cigarettes out of the visible counter, putting them under the counter, maybe making people ask for them, every one of these silly little steps counts. And if we said, if you're under 16, you need a parent to buy a can of soda. It's a radical notion, I understand that. It is not a silly notion. It is a smart notion. If we said that, that would start to change things. We have to make labeling honest. That's achievable, and that's going to happen. We have to not only list calories of fast foods, which is going to happen soon, but we have to list ingredients and, as I said, methods of production. Let's start talking about where these ingredients come from, what else is in these foods, how they're produced, how the workers are treated for that matter. And while you're online Googling VB6 or anything else you think that I said that might be interesting, Google My Dream Food Label. Google Bittman Dream Food Label and see what you think about that. That's something that's not going to happen, but that's the ideal, a food label that really tells you what's in the food you're eating. Some smaller things that are important, we need to subsidize farmers markets, especially indoor city markets. We need to sponsor direct sale by farmers, by fishers, even by hunters. And all of this can be done on a local level. Other things can be done on a personal level. We can demonize bad food for our children. Of course, we can encourage good food, and we've all heard stories of families where they drive by McDonald's and the kids boo instead of saying, let's go to McDonald's. Those are really encouraging stories. Then there's the things we can dream about that probably won't happen anytime soon. We can move towards subsidizing the production and sale and purchase of real food. We do need more farmers for small and medium-sized farms. We don't know how to transfer the land that's in the hand of aging farmers to younger farmers now because land has become so expensive. We need a plan for that. We need to find ways to distribute and purchase real food. We need to make real food competitive with junk. We need fewer people growing. I'm sorry to say this here because I know I'm offending some people. I'm really a very nice guy. We need fewer people growing 2,000 acres of corn and more people growing 200 acres of broccoli. We need to get to a place where chocolate chip cookies cost $2 and apples cost a dime, where burgers cost $5 and salads cost $1, where soda costs $4 and water, once again, is free. In short, we need to subsidize traditional and progressive foodways and desubsidize those that produce non-food or bad food. We need to support the production of food that's green, nutritious, affordable, and fair. We need to support the production of food that treats both workers and eaters and farmers with respect. We need to support the production of affordable, real food. And if we do this, we, the United States, could be leaders in a new worldwide movement again. Currently, we're not. In our own lives, we can move down that spectrum, move from getting 10% of our calories from fresh fruits and vegetables towards getting 90%. And beyond that, I warned you this was a bit like a sermon, We can try to act like an organization for mutual benefit, a real society. We can recognize that we have a moral obligation to one another, a mutual obligation to figure out how to think and how to live sustainably, how to shop and cook and eat well in a way that was taken once for granted, sanely and in tune with tradition and the planet's resources. Like I said, these are moral issues. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know how many questions we'll have time for, but we certainly have time for some. Should we let the leavers leave? I usually leave for questions also. So.
Hi, Mark. My name is Gwen. Thanks so much for talking tonight. So you talked, I got the sense from your talk that you were focusing a lot on the United States and our sense of national pride. But you also talked about how we affect the entire world with our consumption and production of mass agriculture. And then at the end, you hinted that we're not a leader in healthy eating or healthy ways of producing our food. So I'm just wondering if you can speak a little more maybe about places in the world that are doing it right, and how we can engage with those healthier modes of production and eating.
Well, 70% of the food in the world is still produced traditionally. So we can learn from traditional ways of growing food. I do tend to talk mostly about the States, and I think I'm not a chauvinist, but it's the place I know well and or best, and we do have mostly a negative impact on the rest of the world. And if I think sadly the best thing we've done is shown people how terrible things can get. So other countries have the luxury of looking at us and saying, I don't want to go there. So there is that. But if we showed how we could turn this around, others would follow also. There are countries, as I said, there are many places where food is produced traditionally, but that's changing, sadly. There are countries that are making positive steps in public health and in diet, and I guess the two that I know that are setting the best examples are Brazil and Australia. But we could follow other people, but we can figure this out. What needs to happen is that we need a movement that's strong enough to force action on the part of governments at every level. And by the way, just to shortcut this a little bit, I didn't make this entirely clear, but my opinion and that of most people I talk to who think about these things is that we can be most effective now on local levels, that it's obvious to everybody, wherever they are on the political spectrum, that it's nearly impossible to get anything done nationally. But we can get a lot done in our towns and cities and even our states, and that's where I would say we should be putting our energies right now.
Something that you mentioned that really kind of stuck in my mind was the use of antibiotics on animals, which is something I'm definitely opposed to since it does increase the risk of antibiotic-resistant illness. I'm recently getting through the book Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, and he mentioned even organic animals that are antibiotic-free. Some of these farms consist of anywhere from 10 to 20,000 animals in the space, and they're not given antibiotics. And one of the big, huge concerns is that since these animals are crowded into a tiny area, they're absolutely afraid of letting the chickens out after like 5 or 6 weeks, since they're usually they're not given antibiotics. So I was just wondering what your opinions or what your thoughts are about that issue.
You have to ask me a question, I think. Sorry. Oh, God, now we have to call an ambulance.
Oh, my gosh. Ow. I was wondering, like, I mean, I guess what sort of solutions? I mean, if there's, like, you mentioned local farms or local small farms.
The first step is to get rid of antibiotics in routine use. I mean, it's been done in other countries. It's not that difficult. It doesn't cut back on production. It's not, the question is, do you want a revolution in the food system, or do you want to make the food system better? The answer is sort of both. It would be nice to have a revolution in the food system. It's not going to happen anytime soon. But by eliminating routine use of antibiotics in the food supply, we can make industrial production of animals better, safer, better. What comes after that, I don't know. The way you make change, unless you're going to make a revolution, the way you make change is by making a change. Say you take antibiotics out of routine use of antibiotics out of the food supply, and you see what happens, and then you say, that was pretty good. What would be the next best thing? So I guess my answer is, sorry about your head. I guess my answer is, let's do step one, and we can worry about step two after we do step one.
Would you have any thoughts on the whole food plant-based diet as presented by the Esselstyns, Dr. Campbell, and Dr. McDougall?
I just think it's a little, I answered that question asked backwards, but I think it's a little too extreme, and I think it's a little too dogmatic. I really think, I have talked about this exact topic for 5 years. I've written about it for 4.5. I've given hundreds of talks like this. I've thought about this stuff. Really, the best advice I can give is those two things. Eat stuff that you call food, and think about what that is, and then eat that stuff, and eat more plants. To try to eliminate all fat from your diet, to try to only eat plants, it makes it so challenging, you're going to give up. You want to enjoy eating. Food is good. So eat the stuff that's real, and eat it in proper proportions. It's not that complicated. So
My wife and I have adopted the whole food plant-based diet, and we haven't found it challenging or difficult. It's just been a great source of renewed life and health, and I don't know if that's could be a mythological kind of idea that it can't be done.
Your experience is your experience. I'm not denying it, and I'm happy for you. I think many people would find it too challenging, and if I'm happy to be wrong about that. I would find it too challenging. So, okay.
Brad Wilson, Iowa farmer. Welcome to Iowa.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yes. I wish we could get more of you people. I just came back from the East Coast talking to people up at Harvard, actually, at a food conference on some of these issues. But my point for you is, you put quite a bit of emphasis on this question of subsidies, farm subsidies.
I actually barely mentioned them, but okay.
At the end. And you did mention it. But my point is this, that we seem to have a pretty good understanding that food subsidies, such as food stamps, they're strongly correlated with poverty and a lot of bad things, but we're not saying that that's what causes poverty. And similarly with fire trucks, they're strongly correlated with fires. We're not saying that fire trucks cause fires. And that's the problem with the farm subsidy argument. You see, because here in Iowa, we were really at the center of the fight against cheap food and cheap farm prices from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so forth. I have a piece on that in the Edible Iowa. But anyway, so the price floor, that is not a government check, just like a minimum wage, that's the issue. Whereas the subsidy, there's no evidence that subsidies cause cheap prices and that are associated with these things. So we're giving people a false solution because we can't stop, we don't we don't affect cheap food just by cutting out subsidies.
I don't have
and so that's my challenge to you. What's your response?
I don't have a problem with subsidies. I have a problem with what we're subsidizing.
So what farmers have fought for over the decades is we don't want to get paid a subsidy. We want a fair price.
Well, I'm
fine
with a fair price. I'm not fine with a fair price for a majority of the crops being corn and soybeans, because those crops are being used to produce things that are not good for us.
And it's because of the cheap prices that we're growing so much cheap corn and soybeans.
Okay, well, it's not a debate. You asked me what I thought, and I told you.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Rohini. I am a physician, and I also have a background in public health. And so your advocacy for public health policy really resonates with me. But I wonder what you would, how you would recommend that I counsel a family that was struggling to make ends meet, where maybe they're from a small town and they don't have a grocery store with fresh fruits and vegetables, in terms of following what you're advocating for in terms of eating more plants.
You're asking a very hypothetical question of this hypothetical family that lives in a place where there's no grocery store that sells fruits and vegetables. But I will say this. I said food should be affordable. I think food should be affordable. There's two ways things can be affordable. They can become cheaper, or people can have more money. We can't make food cheaper. It's not going to become cheaper. Therefore, people need to make more money. If food is going to be affordable, people have to have more money. So this is not, I'm sorry, I just didn't like my tone. This is not really a food issue. This is a justice issue. And the justice issue is that there should be a guaranteed basic income, or there should be an earned income tax credit, or there should be something that makes it so that no one is so poor that they can't afford to eat decently. I'm really happy that, I can't remember the other thing I said that people clapped about, but it was a little disappointing, but this one I'm really glad you clapped about. So I think one or two more questions and we're...
This is a simple one. I was very
You know what I really like is yes-no questions.
This is close. I was very surprised that you mentioned sleep apnea. I'm just curious as to how that's going.
Wait, surprised that I mentioned what? I'm sorry.
Sleep apnea.
Oh, how it's going. You know what? Once a doctor, it is an easy question, because one doctor once said to me, if you have sleep apnea, you lose 15% of your body weight and it goes away. And that's exactly what happened. So I lost 15% of my body weight and it went away. Well, thank you. I turned 65.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm just curious, I've been really fascinated for a while about the whole hydroponics, aquaponics systems in urban settings, and I'm just wondering what you think the viability of them is in big cities and if they can help at all with the food crisis.
I find it hard to believe that food that's grown in soil isn't better than food that's not grown in soil. That should go over well here, right? To me, if you take water and you put artificial nutrients in it and then you grow stuff in it, you have food that was grown in water with artificial nutrients in it. If you have food that's grown in soil, you can't even imagine. Nope, I don't even think, and someone here surely knows the answer to this question, do we even know everything that's in soil? I mean, it varies from place to place. There's zillions of microorganisms. We have no idea. There's nutrients that probably haven't been named yet. The interaction between the roots and the soil. And I just cannot imagine that food grown in water with chemicals in it can have the same value. I'm not a scientist. I just can't imagine it. We have people here who can speak to this, but there's probably no time for that. One more? One. Seriously.
Mark, let me tell you one fact about Iowa. 100 years ago, we led the nation in tomato production. 100 years ago, we led the nation in apple production. And this farm policy you talk about has led us to bastardize that, to switch to corn and soybeans, which you rightly say. The question I want to quibble with you on...
You know, that's really, really interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah. We led the nation. And at the time, we had 11 congresspeople. Now we're down to 4. So that tells you how corn and soybeans are working for us.
I got to write that down, but I don't have a pen. So I'll find you later.
Please do.
I can't see
I
you
agree with
now,
you that food has to be addressed on a local level, and I agree that we need to go to local production, but I want to quibble with you on national. One of the things I want to ask you about is the 2014 Farm Bill. Yes, it didn't move far enough away from industrial agriculture, but for the first time, there is an organic portion of that Farm Bill. And I guess the question I want to ask you, do you see anything on the horizon which would allow us in this room to have an impact on national food policy, particularly in the next Farm Bill?
You know, that's not, you're not quibbling. We have no argument there. I'm going to correct you on something. There was organic stuff in the Farm Bill from 2009 also, but it did get better, but it is so minuscule. I mean, to almost talk about it in the same breath as other stuff in the Farm Bill is almost outrageous. The Farm Bill, you know, my friend Marion Nessel, who some of you have probably heard of, taught a course in the Farm Bill at Cornell, and at the end of the course she said, I still don't understand it. So it is like completely impenetrable. No one understands it. The only thing we can do is have representatives who have our interests at heart in Congress, and that's the way to affect the Farm Bill. You're not going to have a march on Washington around the Farm Bill that's going to draw 500,000 people. It's not going to happen. But you could have better Congress people from wherever you live who are going to work on this stuff. I mean, Debbie Stabenow, who was chair of the Agricultural Committee, is pretty good, but this is like a boxing match, the way the Farm Bill happens, and we don't have Muhammad Ali on our side. That's the problem. I think I have to stop. I really do. I'm sorry. I'm going to sign books up here, and I'd like to thank you all for coming. Great audience and a wonderful turnout. And thank you.